All right, guys. So, I guess a quick recap here. Um, had a discussion with someone, sort of an argument, sort of a debate. Um, I guess coming at things from different perspectives. Um, he told me that he watched Palmer after my little summary and what I thought about it because he was just curious. And he asked that I watch the movie The Sunset Limited. I did. And I have to say, it's an incredibly good movie. It's everything I look for in a movie. It makes you think, it's deep, it's rife with uh, human experience, psychology, philosophy. It was great. Um, a big part of that was the actors, Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson, two of the best. So, first, I have to say, I recommend the movie to anyone. So I'm not really going to give this big like recap or like every single part of the movie. I couldn't do it anyway because my memory sucks. I only remember like specific things that kind of hit me. Um, but I will kind of go over a general my take type deal. Uh, I think that's what dude's looking for, anyhow. So, as with any good characters, they resonate with people by being relatable. And I can relate to both characters quite a bit in different ways. So the simplicity, the the shunning, not shunning, but the belief that the importance of stuff, worldly things, is not very significant, I share with Samuel L. Jackson's character. Now, I'm just going to say, I guess, Samuel L. Jackson and Tommy Lee Jones from this point forward because the entire thing, which was actually quite brilliant considering it's probably like a really low budget film, other than probably the cost of the two actors, considering how deep and how thought provoking the movie is, given it's all shot in one location, it's pretty amazing. Um, but anyhow, as I was saying, and then I can relate with Tommy Lee Jones and that his general approach to life, his way of perceiving the world, is extremely similar to mine. In many ways. So there's some of this and usually when I say we, I mean humankind in general, and I'm generally talking about like scientists or psychologists or like we've come to a consensus about certain things. That's what I usually mean when I say we. So in this case, we already know a great deal about this subject. And I guess I'm kind of being slippery here. What I'm talking about is the correlation with people with high levels of intelligence and I'm not going to say pessimism because it might just be reality. Um, in fact, I believe it is. But a tendency toward the darkness. I'm not going to be extremely vocabulary laden here on this because I believe the darkness is a very apt description. you see, the greater the intelligence a person has, the more they're capable of sifting underneath the surface. The more they see, I won't say the truth, but I'll say what is most likely the truth, given our limited understanding of the world. The more you can reach outside of the surface, like, let me make a quick, very shitty analogy here. If you are an average Joe and you meet a person, I don't know, you bump into them in a restaurant. I don't know, like, just to make it believable, you happen to know them in high school or something, and you're just like, hey, dude, what's going on? Something like that. An average Joe will see only the surface. They will see, hey, this guy's talking to me. They understand the words, or probably most of them. They don't take in all of the little details because they're not wired for it. Now, when I say wired, I believe that, well, there's really not a point in that whole line, so let me just skip that. It's easy to live in a world that is simple, and that is positive in many ways. People with more intellectual capacity, if you will, don't have the option, or at least don't have even close to as easy of a time doing so. Without even trying, they will see more depth. They will understand things based on perception. They're little, it could be little things that add up to conceptions. Like, you might notice, whereas most people won't, you'll notice tiny little shifts in vocal cues, which signify different things. You'll notice the tiniest little differences in physiognomy, which is, I guess you could call it, the art of reading facial expressions. You don't have it, at least, let's say, and this isn't about saying one is better than the other. It's not about like this belief that intelligence is like the most significant thing in the world and it's superior or anything like that. It's just that it's different, right? Just so you understand where I'm coming from. So a person who has a higher intellectual capacity will, without trying, because they have learned these things simply by being in existence, simply by conversing with people, simply by observing people, which is what highly intelligent people do. They will pick up on these things without having any, you don't need any sort of education. It just comes to you. Many things do. So you will pick up more data, for lack of a better word. You're getting more sensory input. You'll notice little things that give you a more I'm struggling to find the words here. A more ornate, maybe, depiction of the world around you, including people. When this happens, you will notice things that are like not just the surface. Everything, every concept is linked to other concepts that are similar or at least adjacent to, sort of like a family tree. Think of like the big structure, the trunk of the tree is the surface idea, concept, whatever. And intelligent people will branch off from that and make other observations. They're not always correct. I'm not trying to make that case. But they're generally based off of what they've learned in the past, and it's at least likely that they're on the right path, I guess. What happens when people do that is they're not able to. So one good thing about simplicity is that it allows you to, and I have no problem conceding this, it allows you to be happy more so than people who can't do that. You can't trick yourself and pretend like you didn't see the shit that you saw, right? So it's why I believe, this is not a fact, but it's why I believe that people who are more intelligent are more likely to be depressed. That's a fact, but my opinion is why that's the case. It's why they tend to be, they have a higher incidence of mental illness in general, because the more complex your mind, the more your mind is able to get into shit that can possibly go awry. I guess it should be sort of easy to understand in one way of looking at it, because the more complexity something has, the more likelihood that there might be an error involved, if that makes sense. So, and I'm not saying necessarily that being dark or whatever is an error, but hopefully you get my point. So I'm kind of jumping all over the place. It's what I tend to do, but I believe both men are very intelligent. So Samuel L. Jackson has less education than Tommy Lee Jones. Tommy Lee Jones is a professor. Samuel L. Jackson is still a very intelligent person. You can tell by his capacity to understand complex topics. He just doesn't have the structural foundation of education to understand, like, big words, for example, which kind of makes things complicated, or at least more complicated. But he's definitely an intelligent man. So what I believe here, it's not just about intelligence. It's about a choice. So what I see in Samuel L. Jackson is a person. I guess everything here can go back to priorities, at least from my perspective. Samuel L. Jackson prioritizes happiness, at least in my view, above all else. And I believe that Jesus gives him that. It allows him to live in a world that is more simplistic than it would otherwise be. And I'm not saying that that is just wrong, factually wrong. I will say that that is not, like, in short, you can't force your values onto other people. Tommy Lee Jones, in my perspective, sees the world and prioritizes through a lens that is centered on truth. So I'm not saying that Samuel L. Jackson is just factually wrong. I don't have that knowledge. What I'm saying is he does not have evidence, which means he decided at some point that he doesn't need it. This is where things break apart here. This is where the two men go in different directions. And just as I said about Samuel L. Jackson, he's not factually wrong. Neither is Tommy Lee Jones. Both have pros and cons. So I resonate more with Tommy Lee Jones in that what is true, at the very least, pursuing what is true if we don't have the answer, and making truth the fundamental, most important thing we share in common. There's no way out of this. You can't tell someone that your methodology of life is factual. That's one of the problems, because Tommy Lee Jones and myself, we don't take seriously something that's that nonsensical. So what do I mean by that? So Samuel L. Jackson doesn't say, I don't know, but I have a belief that Jesus is real. Or even further than that Jesus is like some holy figure, son of God, God is real, all that good stuff, like literally. So he says it's absolutely true. He's experienced it. This is where you can no longer reach someone with a truth-focused mind, because the way that we evaluate whether you can be taken like as a credible source, at least one of the ways, is the extent at which you believe something is true, plus your evidence for that belief. It seems that Samuel L. Jackson doesn't need that. It's not important to him. And so a lot of people in the position of Tommy Lee Jones, and I've read about this. This is something that I follow pretty closely. It's something that matters to me. There are, it's not like an insane number, but of atheists who convert to Christianity or some other religion, a vast majority of them went through some sort of trauma, if you will. They felt like they were, quote, at the end of their rope, so to speak. This is problematic because it leads to the logical conclusion. Now, I won't say conclusion, but the logical inference that it's more than likely the case that they reached their belief in God due to emotion, meaning they broke. They came to a point where their intelligence or their way of viewing things, the reality in which they saw things, at least their version, was not cutting it for them. Sometimes this happens due to like deaths of a loved one. It happens because, like, I don't know all of the details about Tommy Lee Jones, but I think a lot of it is that he just saw the world as a bleak, shitty place. It's a cesspool. And he just didn't want to be it anymore. I don't think that's illogical, by the way. But so another issue is Samuel L. Jackson tends to view the world. view the world through like a lens that life is intrinsically, automatically valuable, that it is beautiful and worth having no matter what. Maybe that's just me assuming, but it seems to be the case. Now, I believe this is a mistake. I believe that all of this is wrapped up. It's a defense mechanism. So for some people, it happens because they fear death, and belief alleviates that fear. So it serves a purpose to your ego, to your sense of self, if you will. I believe that at some point, Samuel L. Jackson decided that understanding things wasn't his purpose. And a lot of this does come back to purpose. So I'm going to go back to Albert Camus. It might be Albert. I can't pronounce it properly, but it's Camus, who gets into the philosophy of the absurd. And I'm going to boil it down and butcher it. But basically, it is absurd that we as humans are driven toward finding a purpose in life or a greater meaning when there is no objective greater meaning. What I mean when I say objective is it does not apply to all people automatically. You can find meaning, and this is why some people call him a nihilist. I disagree. I think that he's one of the forefathers of existentialism, which is different. It's more like meaning is subjective, but that doesn't mean it's fake. You can find your own version of what is important or your greater purpose by creating it yourself. That doesn't mean it's fake. That just means it doesn't apply to everyone else. So, yeah, there's a lot going on in my head right now. It was a very, very deep interaction between the two. And I'm not going to talk about the end. That would kind of ruin it. But it's very interesting from a psychological perspective. And but again, like we go back to my personal, I believe that you cannot change your fundamental, like most significant values. They are what makes you you. Like many people believe that you're just basically like you can become a blank slate. You could if you get broken or something, but I don't think that that's healthy. But I guess my point is, fundamentally, we are all wired in a certain way. At least specific things. There's at least a handful of things that make you you. They're the things that don't shift around in day-to-day life, like whether or not you're motivated, whether or not you're happy, whether or not you're sad. Those are things that are constantly shifting depending on various factors. Sometimes in your own head, sometimes external. But there are always things that are just your foundation. For me, that is seeking the truth, the objective truth. With that being said, I am fundamentally incapable of believing something that does not have evidence. Moreover, my personal belief, my claim, is that the concept of faith is essentially nothing more than purposefully shutting your brain down on a specific concept or topic because it's inconvenient for you. And I don't agree with that. I do not think that ignorance is bliss. That's subjective. Some people believe that it is. But I do think, okay, so let me put it this way. It is shown that religious people tend, not always, but they tend to be happier than those that aren't. So if your purpose in life is just your well-being, and I've said this before, it's why with specific people, for some people, I believe that religiosity, that dogma is absolutely necessary for their happiness. To be honest, I believe that it's like mental illness to an extent, just being honest. But who am I to like take that away? I wouldn't. In fact, I've fought with other atheists in trying to crash their beliefs because I think that they, of all people, absolutely need their belief. And my goal is not to prove that I'm right to any extent, even if people end up fucking like their entire life just comes crumbling down and they're in this pit of despair. No. I believe that for most people, not all, when you shut your brain down like this, and I believe it's a defense mechanism for various reasons, fear of death, fear of the unknown, it can be very attractive to live in a world that's very black and white. Even Samuel L. Jackson agreed that he believes it is that simple. It's very attractive. It makes things more, it's easier to just relax, especially if you believe that you don't really control much, that it's really, there's somebody up there pulling the strings and they've got everything under control, right? It's easy to just relax and just let the world be. Yes, that can contribute to happiness. My goal is not to be happy. Don't get me wrong, it'd be nice. Well, for me personally, I think that searching for happiness itself is a mistake because happiness is a temporary set of chemical reactions in the brain for a reason. You can't reach it constantly. It's impossible. In fact, your brain wires itself that if you like become like a dopamine junkie or just try to get quick fixes, you will need more and more as time goes on, even for those exact same things. So what I believe is people should seek peace. That's what I look for. However, I can't pretend that the truth doesn't matter in order to do so. To me, that is personally, and this is not attacking anyone, this is just to me, that is cowardice. It doesn't take a very strong person to lean on what I consider an imaginary friend in order to get through life. However, it does, in my opinion, weaken them. Because no matter what, if you lie to yourself because it's easier, it's going to come back to bite you sooner or later. I believe that truth in itself is almost always worth pursuing because in the end, it's a long struggle. It's a pain in the ass. It sucks. It makes you see things for what they are, or at least what I think they are. But it gives you advantages, at least in certain regards. You're less likely to be blindsided, for one. You're able to help mankind to a greater degree because you can innovate. You can keep searching, which just the very act of doing that propels men forward. And I'm not just talking about technology. I'm talking about everything. Anything that makes life meaningful. That is the fundamental difference. I believe that Samuel L. Jackson is a really good man. Truly. And he's Well, for one, I'll say, one, they're characters, they're not real, but there are correlations with the real world. There are people like Samuel L. Jackson, or at least very similar in real life, but they're very, very few and far between. He does not represent your average religious person. And I mean that in a good way toward him, at least. Um, but yeah, I think that's the best way I can just kind of finish this off. I'm kind of running way too long on here. So I care about truth first and foremost. You can't claim that you care about truth more than anything else if you're willing to accept faith as a reason for anything, including your God or your beliefs. You can't have both. So if you believe on faith without evidence, you're putting something else before truth. What is that? It depends on the person. Some people, it's personal happiness. I think that's oftentimes the case. There's many different answers here, but it's not truth. That's not your number one. It can't be. Otherwise, you would not believe without evidence. You can't. Like that's the fundamental thing that I think a lot of people don't understand here. And I don't believe there's an easy way out of this. Not without just, like I said, you just come to like a point of despair so extreme that you just want it to stop and you just want to give in and just live in this binary world of simplicity for the rest of your life. That's fine. But I, for one, and who knows, maybe I'll change my mind one day. I highly doubt it, but maybe. I don't think that is the answer for most people. And I think that that answer generally leads to more harm than good. Thank you for your time.